Continuing with the fifth chapter of The Sword and the Stone, the wart has just been turned into a fish.
"Oh, Merlin," cried the wart, "please come too."
"Just for this once," said a large but solemn Tetch beside his ear, "I will come. But in future you will have to go by yourself. Education is experience, and the essence of experience is self-reliance." The wart found it difficult to be a fish. It was no good trying to swim like a human being, for it made him go corkscrew, and much too slowly. He did not know how to swim like a fish. "Not like that," said the Tetch in ponderous tones. "Put your chin on your left shoulder and do jackknives. Never mind about the fins to begin with." Wart's legs had fused together into his backbone, and his feet and toes become a tail fin. His arms had become two more fins, also a delicate pinkish color, and he had sprouted some more somewhere about his tummy. His head faced over his shoulder, so that when he bent in the middle, his toes were moving toward his ear instead of toward his forehead. He was a beautiful olive green color, with rather scratchy plate armor all over him, dark bands down his sides. He was not sure which were his sides and which were his back and front. But what now appeared to be his tummy had an attractive whitish color, while his back was armed with a splendid great fin that could be erected for war and had spikes on it. He did jackknives as the Tetch directed, and found that he was swimming vertically downward into the mud. "Use your feet to turn left or right with," said the Tench, "and spread those fins on your tummy to keep level. You are living in two places at once now. You are living in two planes now, not one." The wart found that he could keep more or less level by altering the inclination of his arm fins and the ones on his stomach. He swam feebly, enjoying himself very much. "Come back," said the Tench solemnly. "You must learn to swim before you can dart." The wart returned to his tutor in a series of zigzags and remarked, "I don't seem to keep quite straight." "The trouble with you is that you don't swim from the shoulder. You swim as if you were a boy just bending at the hips. Try doing your jackknives right from the neck downward, and move your body exactly the same amount to the right as you were going to move it to the left. Put your back into it." The wart gave two terrific kicks and vanished altogether in a clump of mare's tail several yards away. "That's better," said the Tench. Now quite out of sight in the murky olive water, and the wart backed himself out of his tangle with infinite trouble by wriggling his arm fins. He undulated back toward the voice in one terrific shove to show off. "Good," said the Tench, as they collided end to end. "But direction is the better part of valor." "Try if you can do this one," said the Tench. Without apparent exertion of any kind, he swam off backwards under a water lily, without apparent exertion, but the wart, who was an enterprising learner, had been watching the slightest movement of his fins. He moved his own fins anti-clockwise and gave the very tip of his own tail a cunning flick, and was lying alongside the Tench. "Splendid," said Merlin. "Let's go for a little swim." The wart was on an even keel now, and reasonably able to move about. He had leisure to observe the extraordinary universe into which the tattooed gentleman's trident had plunged him. It was very different from the universe to which he had hitherto been accustomed. For one thing, the heaven or the sky above him was now a perfect circle, poised a few inches above his head. The horizon had closed into this. In order to imagine yourself in the wart's position, you will have to picture a round horizon a few inches above your head, instead of the flat horizon which you have usually seen. Under this horizon of air, you will have to imagine another horizon of underwater, spherical, and practically upside down, for the surface of the water acted partly as a mirror to what was below it. It is difficult to imagine. What makes it a great deal more difficult to imagine is that everything which human beings would consider to be above water level was fringed with all the colors of the spectrum. For instance, if you had happened to be fishing for the wart, he would have seen you at the rim of a tea saucer, from which was the upper air to him, not as one person waving a fishing pole, but as 7 people whose outlines were red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, all waving the same rod whose colors were as varied. In fact, you would have been a rainbow man to him, a beacon of flashing and radiating colors which ran into one another and had rays all about. You would have burned upon the water like Cleopatra in the poem Beheridia. The reference may possibly be to Shakespeare. The next most lovely thing was that the wart had no weight. He was not earthbound anymore and did not have to plod along on a flat surface pressed down by gravity and the weight of the atmosphere. He could do what men have always wanted to do, that is, fly. There is practically no difference between flying in water and flying in the air. The best of it was that he did not have to fly in a machine by pulling levers and sitting still, but could do it with his own body. It was like the dreams people have. Just as they were going to swim off on their tour of inspection, a timid young roach appeared from between 2 waving bottle brushes of mare's tail and hung about, looking quite pale with agitation. It looked at them with big, apprehensive eyes and evidently wanted something, but could not make up its mind. "Approach," said Merlin gravely. At this, the roach rushed up like a hen, burst into tears, and began stammering its message. "If you please, doctor," stammered the poor creature, gabbling so that it could scarcely understand what it said. "We have a dreadful case of something or other in our family, and we wondered if you could spare the time. It is our dear mamma who will swim all the time upside down, and she does look so horrible and speaks so strange that we really thought she ought to have a doctor if it wouldn't be too much. Clara says so too, sir. If you see what I mean." Here the little roach began fizzing so much, what with its stammer and its tearful disposition, that it became perfectly inarticulate, and could only stare at Merlin with big, mournful eyes. "Never mind, my little man," said Merlin. There, lead me to your poor mamma, and we shall see what we can do." They all 3 swam off into the murk under the drawbridge, upon their errand of mercy. "Very Russian, these roach," whispered Merlin to the wart behind his fin. "It's probably only a case of nervous hysteria, a matter for the psychologist rather than the physician." The roach's mamma was lying on her back, as he had described. She was squinting horribly, had folded her fins upon her chest, and every now and then she blew a bubble. All her children were gathered round her in a circle, and every time she blew a bubble they all nudged each other and gasped. She had a seraphic smile upon her face. Well, said Merlin, putting on his best bedside manner. "How is Mrs. Roach today?" He patted all the young roaches on the head and advanced with stately motions toward his patient. It should perhaps be mentioned that Merlin was a ponderous, deep-breathed fish, or deep-beamed fish, about 5 pounds, red leather colored with small scales, adipose in his fins, rather slimy, and having a bright marigold eye, a respectful figure. Mrs. Roach held out a languid fin, sighed emphatically, and said, "Oh, doctor, so you have come at last." Said Merlin in his deepest tones, and then told everybody to close their eyes. Wart peeped, and began to swim round the invalid in slow and stately dance. As he danced, he sang a song. His song was this: "Therapeutic, elephantic, diagnosis, boom. Pancreatic, microstatic, antitoxic, doom. What the normal catabolism, gabbalism, and babbalism. Snip, snap, snorum, cut out his abdomen, dyspepsia, anemia, toxemia, 1, 2, 3, and out goes he, with the folder all for the 5 guinea fee." At the end of his song, he was swimming round his patient so close that he actually touched her, stroking his brown, smooth, scaled flanks against her
more rather pale ones. Perhaps he was healing her with his slime, for all the fishes are said to go to the tench for their medicine, or perhaps it was by touch or massage or hypnotism. In any case, Mrs. Roach suddenly stopped squinting, turned the right way up, and said, "Oh, doctor, dear doctor, I feel I could eat a little lobworm now." "No lobworm," said Merlin, "not for 2 days. I shall give you a prescription for a strong broth of algae every 2 hours, Mrs. Roach. We must build up your strength, you know. After all, Rome wasn't built in a day." Then he patted all the little roaches once more and told them to grow up into brave little fish, and swam off with an air of great importance into the gloom. As he swam, he puffed his mouth in and out. "What did you mean by that about Rome?" asked the wart, when they were out of earshot. "Heaven knows," said the tench. They swam along, Merlin occasionally advising him to put his back into it when he forgot, and all the strange underwater world began to dawn about them, deliciously cool after the heat of the upper air. The great forests of weeds were delicately traced, and in them there hung motionless many schools of sticklebacks, learning to do their physical exercises in strict unison. On the word 1, they all lay still. At 2, they faced about. At 3, they all shot together into a cone, whose apex was a bit like something to eat. Water snails slowly ambled about on the stems of the lilies under the leaves, while freshwater mussels lay on the bottom doing nothing in particular. Their flesh was salmon pink, like a very good strawberry ice cream. The small congregations of perch. It was a strange thing, but all the bigger fish seemed to have hidden themselves, had delicate circulations, so they blushed or grew pale as easily as a lady in a Victorian novel. Only their blush was a deep olive color, and it was the blush of rage. Whenever Merlin and his companions swam past them, they raised their spiky dorsal fins in menace, and only lowered them when they saw that Merlin was a tench. The black bars on their sides made them look as if they had been grilled, and these also could become darker or lighter. Once the 2 travelers passed under a swan. The white creature floated above like a zeppelin, all indistinct except what was under the water. The latter part was quite clear, and showed them that the swan was floating slightly on one side, with one leg cocked up over its back. "Look," said the wart, "it's the poor swan with the deformed leg. It can only paddle with one leg, and the other side of it is all hunched." "Nonsense," said the swan snappily, putting its head into the water and giving them a frown with its black nars. "Swans like to rest in this position, and you can keep your fishy sympathy to yourself, so there!" It continued to glare at them from up above, like a white snake suddenly let down through the ceiling, until they were out of sight. "You swim along," said the tench in gloomy tones, "as if there was nothing to be afraid of in the world. Don't you see that this place is exactly like the forest you had to come through to find me?" "It is. Look over there." The wart looked, and at first saw nothing. Then he saw a little translucent shape hanging motionless near the surface. It was just outside the shadow of Water Lily, and was evidently enjoying the sun. It was a baby pike, absolutely rigid and probably asleep, and it looked like a pipe stem or a seahorse stretched out flat. It would be a brigand when it grew up. "I am taking you to see one of those," said the tench. "The emperor of all the Purlians. As a doctor, I have immunity, and I dare say he will respect you as my companion as well. But you had better keep your tail bent, in case he is feeling tyrannical." "Is he the king of the moat?" "He is the king of the moat. Old Jack, they call him, and some Black Peter. But for the most part, they don't mention him by name at all. They just call him Mr. M. You will see what it is to be a king." And we'll pause there.